Hi, I'm Julius Atuhurra, and this is the second part of the two-part lecture series on diagnosing incoherence in education systems. In this second part, I will focus on the practice of conducting SEC alignment studies. So we'll be looking at the key steps that are involved in the process of conducting these studies, and that's taxonomy, panel of experts, coding and rating, and so on and so forth. And then we'll summarize at the end of this process of looking at the practices. So the beginning point of the surveys of enacted curriculum, conducting surveys of enacted curriculum studies, is developing or adopting a comprehensive domain-specific taxonomy. So what does this mean? This is a list of the relevant content areas relating to the specific subject that you're looking at, let me say primary mathematics. So you have to list all the relevant topics and subtopics within each of those topics. So to do this, usually, in order for this to be comprehensive and exhaustive, you'll need to form a team of experts in this particular domain or subject area, so that they are able to state the required content that should be covered for a specific level or cycle, whether it's primary or basic or secondary, and then have that as the main blueprint, a comprehensive taxonomy. That's the first step, always beginning with that. So once the taxonomy is in place, and in the case of the East African studies that I referenced in the first part, we adopted the K-12, the United States-based K-12 taxonomies. We translated this and adapted it to the different contexts in the three countries, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So we dropped content that is irrelevant for the context, and kept that is relevant, and also added other content that was relevant for the context that we were working in. So it's possible to develop a new taxonomy, but also to adapt an existing one by contextualizing it to the specific context where the study is being done. Now, the second important step is to compose a panel of subject experts who are going to do the main part of the work, really, which relates to coding and rating the content that is embedded in the instructional components that we referred to. You remember the triangle of relationships? So these are going to be subject level professionals, and that's why we're calling them experts. And we need broader involvement or representation across different actors or players. You can talk of the curriculum department, you can talk of the examination bodies, you can talk of teachers, you can talk of curriculum institutes at universities and teacher training colleges, but also teacher tutors. Those important subject level professionals will do the job of coding and rating the content that is embedded in the instructional components that we're going to look at. So the third part is to now do the actual work of coding and rating these components. And how does this work? So the members of this subject panel or subject experts panel work, first of all, independently by coding all these items or objectives or competencies, whatever the case is. For every country, they have different ways they refer to these. But the learning objectives spelled out in these components, if it's the assessments, those are the examination items. If it's the curriculum standards, those are the objectives. And if the textbooks, again, you'll be looking at the content in terms of the topics, subtopics, and driving the codes for those, the content that is embedded in there. So after the individual work is completed, then group discussions happen between the members of the panel of experts. They discuss the work they did. Remember, each member of the panel is an expert, so there's no requirement when you discuss to change your coding and rating because of what others have done. But in case as an expert, you realize that probably your coding wasn't as accurate as you'd have wanted, and this discussion then helps you to amend. So this discussion is meant to help the amendment in case you need to amend your codes, otherwise you don't. So the other part is to conduct the teacher survey the teachers about their instructional content in terms of what is the content they deliver in the classroom. And also, as we already say, that we can use the surveys of enacted curriculum also to look at the actual learning achievement of the children, conduct also the learning achievements or the assessments themselves. So referring to the teachers, it's important, first of all, orient them on the methodology and have them do some activities of coding and rating so that they know when they now do the self-reporting of the content they cover in the classroom, what they are doing. And then after all that is done, then we have data that can be analyzed and reported on. So in brief, to conduct the surveys of enacted curriculum, we have inputs, which in this case, I've just referred to some of these before, the taxonomy of the content in terms of topics and subtopics, and the performance expectations, which we're going to look at briefly in the next few minutes. And then once that is put together, these are the main two inputs that the experts and teachers are going to be using to report and do their coding of the work. Then you are going to be able to produce a data set. This data set is going to show you the topics or the content areas and the levels of cognitive demand that are embedded in those contents. So the outputs include the content maps, as we are going to see them, and then marginal charts and the alignment indices. We're going to talk about this in the next few steps. So let's talk about the taxonomy. So this is an illustration of a taxonomy, and I'm using the example of the recent work that I referred to in Nepal. So this is a list. On the left-hand side, you have a list of all the topics that are embedded in the Nepali language arts and reading taxonomy: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, language study, sources of text, and so on and so forth. Now, under each of those topics, you have the subtopics that are embedded in each of the topics. So this is the work that is done when developing or adapting the taxonomy. You come up with this comprehensive list of the relevant content areas. So this is what students should be able to know. Now, after developing the taxonomy, we have another component of this taxonomy refers to the performance expectations. The performance expectations are what students should be able to do with those content areas that we have just identified. And these, we have 5 categories of performance expectations, beginning from the least demanding to the most demanding. Memorize, recall is least demanding. Then you move on to performing procedures, and there are descriptors below each of these to show what it means or to define what these levels of performance expectations mean, from memorize up to evaluating and integrating. So the 5 levels of cognitive complexity or the expectations for performance range from the simple to the complex, from recall, procedures, application, up to integration and synthesis. Now let's talk about teacher instructional content. So what happens when we do the teacher survey or when we survey teachers' instructional content? So teachers, first of all, we have to orient them on the methodology, the surveys of enacted curriculum methodology, so that they are familiar with what they are going to be reporting on in terms of the content they deliver in the classroom. So we ask them, referring to the class that they teach for this specific subject they are being surveyed on, to reflect on the amount of emphasis that they put to specific content areas in terms of the topics and subtopics. And how do they reflect and report on this amount of emphasis? It's in terms of time on topic or subtopic area, but this time is relative time. They do not have to report specific number of hours or minutes and so on and so forth. So they can report no emphasis at all. That means a content area that is not covered, or slight coverage, or slight emphasis, or moderate, or sustained. So this kind of reporting is quite fine for the teachers. They can do this easily. And then once they've reported for a specific content area, the amount of time of emphasis they put towards that area, then they also have to report the level of cognitive demand or expectations for students learning in relation to that specific content area, in terms of whether this requires them to memorize or perform or generate, analyze, or evaluate and integrate the content. So let's look at an example of what really this coding and rating work means, which is what exactly teachers are doing, and also experts, that's what they are doing, kind of an illustration. So let's use a learning objective. In this case, the learning objective is to listen to the reading text and identify new words. So if this is a learning objective that is spelled out in the curriculum standards, the teacher is aiming to make sure that the learners listen to the text that the teacher is going to read, and the learners will be able to identify the new words in that text. What does this require? When you're coding this kind of objective, you look at the topics and subtopics that are touched by this objective. In this case, we can talk of phonemic awareness and phonics, to be able to listen to the words that are in this reading, the vocabulary itself, so for you to know that this is a new word or this is not a new word, the vocabulary topic comes in, and then the comprehension. If the child understands this particular word, then he's not going to identify it as a new word because it's not new anymore. And then after they have identified that content area in terms of topic and subtopic, then the cognitive process that is involved in doing this is recalling, performing a procedure, and analyzing. So this is the kind of work that is done in coding and rating. So the experts and the teachers are being asked to code and rate their work, or the work that, or the content that is embedded in the instructional components on these two dimensions, content area and cognitive process. What do you get at the end of that? So the result is that you're going to generate or to develop a data set. A data set here, we are using an illustration of a data set that shows you the codes of the topics or subtopics, 302, 101, 308, 210, 901, 902. Those are content areas. And then the levels of cognitive demand or performance expectations, B, C, D, E, and F, memorize, perform, demonstrate, analyze, and integrate. So this data set is then taken through a process, an analysis process, to generate an alignment index. So this process begins with the individual level data being analyzed and processed in terms of after the group discussions, for example, for the experts, as we said. Then for each individual expert, their data is processed into the proportions, relative proportions, and is normalized. So once those proportions have been processed, then we average across all the teachers or all the experts, and then be able to produce measures of relative emphasis. Now, I use an illustration here of two instructional components, assessments and curriculum standards. So let's assume this is on the vertical axis, we have the topics or subtopics, and then on the horizontal axis, we have the levels of cognitive demand or performance expectations. Okay? So the total emphasis that is reflected in each of these components is going to be 100%, which is a 1. And therefore, we divide it by the different cells where the emphasis is for each of those intersections of topic, subtopic, and cognitive demand level. So you can see the distribution of emphasis across the two different components. And then we generate an alignment index, which is a simple index actually, beginning from 1 if it is if the emphasis is the same across both components, then it's going to be 1. But this is going to be scaled down by the deviations across the emphasis differences between the two instructional components. So we take the absolute mean deviation here and then come up with an alignment index that ranges between 0 and 1. indicating perfect alignment, meaning that the emphasis levels are the same across both components. That is 1. And then 0 means they are not in any way related. The emphases are different across the two instructional components. So as an output, I use an illustration here of the primary 7 curriculum standards in Uganda. And I take the mathematics one, and this is the output. We have a 3D content map that represents all the content that is embedded inside this curriculum standard or syllabus standard. On the y-axis, we have the topics and subtopics. On the x-axis, we have the levels of cognitive demand. And then on the z-axis, we have the contour lines and color bands that indicate relative emphasis on each intersection of topic and level of cognitive demand. So the darker areas indicate more emphasis, and the lighter areas means less or indicate less emphasis. So over here, we are able then to use these content maps to compare them across different instructional components. So as we can see here, we have the curriculum standards for English in Uganda, and here the teacher instructional content that they have delivered in the classroom, and then here the examination content that is reflected in the examination or the assessments at the end of the cycle. So we are able to look at these 3 different content maps and compare each 2 of them at the same time. So remember the triangle of relationships. We keep going back to that. Across, on each side of the triangle, we are able to compare 2 components and be able to analyze how aligned are those 2. So another example here is the Tanzanian case. So this is for mathematics. On the left side are the curriculum syllabus standards. In the middle, teacher instructional content. And then on the right side, the examination, the items in the examination and the content emphasis in those exams. So we are able then, using the alignment index that I illustrated previously, to come up with these measures of alignment across instructional components, which tell us of how coherent the content embedded in each of the 2 instructional components being compared is across those 2. So you can see here measures of alignment ranging from a very low 0.11 to 0.57. The highest will be a 1, which means that the content across the 2 different instructional components is exactly the same. So these are the illustrations of alignment indices that can be generated using the surveys of enacted curriculum methodology or approach to establishing coherence across instructional components. In summary, we are saying, to begin with, we know very little about alignment and coherence across instructional components, especially in the developing country setting. So there is very little evidence existing on alignment of curriculum standards, examinations, and teacher instructional content, but also of actual learning that children are obtaining once they go through the instructional experience. The surveys of enacted curriculum methodology provides a systematic and structured way in terms of the tools that we have just been looking at to fill this gap. And there are other indications that low alignment is prevailing in many countries or in many situations. So low alignment is more common than high alignment. The surveys of enacted curriculum methodology can also be used as a diagnostic tool that will help education systems identify areas of instructional incoherence, and that will inform the efforts that education systems take to improve coherence, ultimately for learning. So this structured approach can be used to facilitate policymaker decisions and decisions on many things, including mapping the path that they expect children to take from when they enter school towards achieving the aspirations that education systems have set for them. So something we did not talk about in this lecture is progression alignment. How is content aligned across grades, across cycles, as children are progressing through schools? So this ensures that children have the opportunity to learn all the necessary and appropriate content along the way. Finally, surveys of conducted curriculum can help diagnose the gaps between children's actual learning levels and the current standards, exams, and instructions. So we did not talk about this much in this lecture, but once you have data of children's achievements on particular assessments, then you can bring that data into the same structure, same framework, and be able to compare the alignment across different components, including the actual learning that has taken place. Thank you for listening to this lecture.